The theologian Richard John Newhouse wrote in the journal First Things about St. Philip Neri, who in the 1500s headed a monastery. Neri gave a most unusual penance to a novice monk who was guilty of spreading malicious gossip. He told him to take a feather pillow to the top of a church tower on a blustery day and there release all the feathers to the wind. Then he was to come down from the tower, collect all the feathers dispersed over the far countryside, and put them back into the pillow. Of course, he couldn't do it, and that was precisely Philip's point about the great evil of slander. Slander has a way of spreading to the four winds, and once released, can never be completely recalled. Even when accusations are firmly nailed as false, the reputations of those falsely accused bear a lingering taint. Oh yes, it's vaguely said. Wasn't he once accused of...
Our community was founded almost 40 years ago by my parents on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, New York. Pretty rough place. And they did it because they made a choice to open their lives and their hearts to help people in great need. That was the beginning, but that's still our mission today, is to open our lives and help people in need. And as a community, we believe we have a wonderful life. And when you have something wonderful, your impulse is to share it. And that's what we've tried to do. We love watching school children on a field trip see the animals, to watch the face of a child when he holds a baby chick in his hand, and see the thrill and the awe at that new life. To see visitors appreciate the what goes into making a pot or a piece of furniture the traditional way. And it's been our desire to open our lives. We have more than 50,000 visitors pass through our farm every year. At the Thanksgiving festival, I mean, I've never seen a place where children are more happy. And in our music programs, our worship also, it's a chance for us to share with others something that we believe is wonderful.
We've got a relatively small group of ex-members who are hostile to us. Most of them we asked to leave for various problems, various needs. They've gotten together, they've talked about their stories and rehashed them, and they've really grown in antagonism and accusations against us over the years. They tried various outlets and ways in which they could spread their stories against us, and when those did not have the effect that they wanted, they ultimately found the ear of reporters in the media that were willing to spend lots of time with them. They saw the makings of a juicy story, and by the time we were ever involved, we realized that the storyline was predetermined. We realized that there was an extremely strong bias that was already present, and that we just did not see that our side of the story and our perspective on all this was ever going to be able to be accurately portrayed by participating with them in the story, and that's why we declined it. It's our hope that in doing this, that it'll give us a chance to share our hearts with everybody else, and for them to be able to see that there really is a different perspective to the face that the media is trying to paint on our community.
Why are ex-members so bitter towards you? Why are they saying these things if they're not true? And it's a very good question. It's a legitimate question. And the answer is that many of them are not. Many ex-members are not bitter toward us. Many of them are still our friends. The question is about these who are voicing these kind of false accusations against us.
In one way, it's not hard to imagine how these stories generate, because I've seen it before in people. When you've experienced something wonderful and you decide you can't do it, you can't live up to the standard, then you walk away from it, you've lost it, and somehow you've got to justify what you've done.
And that's their right and that's their choice. But sometimes they can be embittered. Just as in a divorce where people have been so close and shared so much, it's become a syndrome that the spouses will end up incredibly hostile and hateful toward each other.
When you've made the kind of commitment, when you've lived the life that we share and have made the kind of commitment to it that it involves, you don't live the life that we live just on a whim. It takes commitment. And when you make that kind of commitment, you enjoy the fruit of that kind of life. You share the closeness of relationship, the depth of relationship, and then you walk away from it. You're going to have to give an answer. You're going to have an explanation for that.
And the best way to justify it is to say, it was something terrible I walked away from. But if it was really something terrible, you would just be happy you got away. But if something in you thinks you might have done the wrong thing, then you've got to convince yourself, and more than that, you've got to convince everybody else that it was something terrible and I had to do it. Because in your heart, you're longing to have what you don't have anymore.
I remember one of the young men, we worked with him for years to try to help him overcome various social and ethical dysfunctions. I considered him a friend. He had a soft heart, he was a sweet guy, but he made the choice, I'm not gonna continue to deal with my ills any longer. All we really tried to do was help him, try to help him become something more than he really ended up choosing to be. And that's the unfortunate and sad part in the whole thing.
Well, I have a PhD in religious studies from Rice University, and some of the courses I took there had to do with sociology of religion, and I was especially interested in non-traditional religious groups. I grew up in one that was not traditional, and my experience growing up was that people who left our church sometimes were bitter and said things that I knew were not true about our church. And this is a well-known phenomenon among sociologists of religion, that ex-members of high-demand religious organizations often turn against them. When there is a high-demand religious situation or context, it's often the case, and I would say always the case, that somebody leaves the group, either voluntarily or is asked to leave, it can happen both ways, and complains bitterly about things they knew were the case when they were there as far as rules and regulations and lifestyle and so forth. And often just tell untruths, lie about things. I experienced that growing up. My dad was a pastor and our church was a high-demand Pentecostal church. And several people that I remember who left went around the community lying about us. And it wasn't a surprise to us because we knew them and we knew why they left.
And when people choose to abandon and divorce themselves from this life, it often leads to the same syndrome of bitterness, hatred, resentment, and a desire to destroy the happiness of others. If they can't have it, they don't want anyone to have it. But they know the only way they could destroy it is by tainting it with slander and smears and slur. And that way they hope that they can take away our happiness too, but they won't be able to.
But I've had also the opportunity to minister to the community, having been invited to speak till the community gathered on 3 or 4 occasions in the last few years. They're very attentive, very open, very receptive. One of the things that impressed me about the community is their openness, their desire to study Scripture and to seriously study it. And their willingness to be challenged as far as their own viewpoints are concerned, and to discuss those viewpoints with other people freely and openly. I've never felt any sense of defensiveness.
I'm surprised, being an outsider that I am, I'm surprised at how close I feel to many people in the community, how I've really developed some strong friendships over the time that I've been coming here. Yet I'm an outsider. They welcome me, they treat me well, they include me in the activities, they allow me to go off with their children one-on-one and work and so forth. There's no restrictions on me. And I know my perspectives are not the best in the world, you know, and sometimes it might be risky to have me around because I'm a bit of an opinionated guy. But it's still a refreshing thing to see that kind of trust and love that I get here from the community.
My students ask all kinds of questions, and some of them are very challenging, sometimes not even particularly polite. But the people at Homestead Heritage have always been receptive to the questions and answered them very openly, and they're of a theological nature. They've ranged everywhere from the Trinity to agriculture to homeschooling, to you name it, and my students have asked it. And I've always enjoyed listening to the questions and the answers both, and the people at Homestead Heritage have always been polite and receptive and willing to answer the questions fully.
When the reporter called me, he assured me that he was coming at this story from a completely neutral angle. He said, as a journalist, I deliberately come at this from a neutral point of view. It's not a religious point of view or a secular point of view. It's just no point of view at all. And that was a little bit hard for us to believe, because he told me in the same conversation that he had been working on this story already for 2 months, interviewing our hostile ex-members and such, and had only just now contacted us a few days before the deadline for his story.
We're supposed to believe that some reporter who doesn't really know us, doesn't know us at all, doesn't have any contact with us, has heard some rumors about us, is going to be the one who's going to be able to come here and give the real, true evaluation of what this community is really all about. That idea is based on this myth of the reporter's objectivity. And Gay Tuckman, who's an influential sociologist at the University of Connecticut, she's investigated this, and she says all the studies that have been done on this have punctured the myth of the reporter's ability to be able to distinguish his own opinions from reality. There's absolutely no evidence for it, and when these reporters are asked, or the editors, how they know, how they're able to distinguish those things, they say, we just know how to do it.
They can't make a distinction between their own opinion and news analysis. And so we're not dealing with news, we're dealing with their opinion projected onto the other people as they mediate daily reality and the daily circumstances of life for those people.
Professor Tuckman says that the reason why these journalists use this principle of objectivity is they're just invoking it as a defense against criticism. And she compares that to a Mediterranean peasant who wears garlic around his neck to ward off evil spirits.
We don't like to think of it this way, and there are many, many honorable people in the media, in the press, in television, and we've met many of them. But this is a tremendous power. People tell us, well, these are award-winning journalists, and these are people who've been qualified by their training and such. But recent research has shown that none of that is true, that their training doesn't prevent them from being biased. They're just like the rest of us. A lot of us have been trained in different things, but it doesn't qualify us to be unbiased and impartial observers of reality and life.
Another thing that made us question whether this journalist was really placing the priority on accuracy and the truth, and willing to take the time necessary to discern what was really going on here, was the fact that we had heard from a couple other people that he'd contacted about his story that he was in a hurry to publish this story because he knew that our ex-members had already contacted another media outlet as well, and he wanted to beat them to the story.
When the story's already framed and then the reporter comes and the only thing you really have the opportunity to do is to respond to the already set storyline, then that's when participation can actually make you an accomplice to a false storyline. And that's exactly the situation we faced in these recent media attacks against us. And we felt that we were doing very much the right thing not to participate.
We've given dozens of media interviews in the past with newspapers, news magazines, television stations. In fact, we gave television interviews and during the Branch Davidian crisis here in Waco. We've always been very open about who we are and what we believe and so forth. In this case, things were a little different. We knew from things we'd been hearing from some of the people that this reporter had contacted, as well as from what he told me himself on the phone, that he'd been spending months with some of our detractors, hearing some very sensational accusations and anonymous atrocity stories and things like that. And so we knew what the storyline was going to be. And we felt, in fact, that it was simply going to lend credence and an appearance of fairness, an appearance that the story was balanced because we'd been given the opportunity to say our piece, and we just had no confidence that it was going to accurately represent us. So in this case, we felt like it would be more appropriate and the truth would better be served to decline the interview with the journalist and to publish our own response to the accusations in our own context. We've always made it our goal to try to reach out and help those who need it the most. And when any ministry is reaching out to people from dysfunctional backgrounds and such, you're likely to encounter some serious personal failures in the people that you're trying to help. And we've had some of that. We've even encountered a few cases of criminal behavior. And in those cases, it was our ministry that exposed the crime in the first place, and we reported it to the appropriate law enforcement agencies. But to characterize our entire community by the personal failures of people that we've tried to help or by crimes that we've exposed and reported is to blame us not for what we've done wrong, but for what we've done right.
In many conflicts with the media that the general public is aware of, it's often the media versus a very prominent public figure, such as a politician but the equation is a little different when on one side is the power of the media and on the other side is a relatively unknown minority religious group. And we don't have the resources, we don't have the right versus left media in our support. We just have the witness of our lives and the relationships, the personal relationships we have with our neighbors and friends. And we hope that people will come out here and see for themselves. And if it seems if some accuse us of being a little sensitive and overreacting in these matters, do they know that we've had our church pulpit desecrated by our detractors? We've had swastikas painted on our property. We've had threatening letters sent saying that our children are being watched through the windows and asking, are our cemeteries full yet? Do they know of us, our members, being accosted in public by former members and with threats that our community is going to be destroyed? Of calls at 5 o'clock in the morning threatening to expose us in the media? Do they know of these things? These things give us cause for concern, because this is our families. This is about our families. This is about our way of life. And we don't want to see it destroyed.
If people could back off from the situation and invite others to come in a more direct way and experience, look at the life of people, get to know them, and not have to do so through a lens that's really just a hermeneutic of suspicion and doubt. And once you put that on somebody, it's very hard to remove. It's like dumping a clod of dirt into a pitcher of water. You do that, you can work very hard to get that clod and that dirt out of that pitcher. But there's not many people who are going to want to drink from that pitcher.
To me, personally, after having spent 41 years in this endeavor, that is just devastating to think that you could put a twist or a spin or put some wrong emphasis or some blurred distortion or some just portray it in some way that is so totally, completely different from what it is, from what I see it to be, from what the people in the community perceive it to be, from what our neighbors and friends experience it to be. There's something about that is so troubling that they could be as opposite as night and day, what a person would experience and what the media might portray it to be.
One of the greatest attributes of our community that ought to testify to the falseness of these allegations is the fact that we are such an open community. We're open 6 days a week, 52 weeks of the year, to thousands of people who come out and just enjoy their time visiting with our young people, visiting with our children, visiting our shops, just having an all-around great time.
I hope that we can be known not by the stories of those who have abandoned our way of life and our beliefs and our values. That kind of thing, Gandhi once called the drain inspector's report. But rather, I hope that we would be known by those of us who are actually living and enjoying the blessed life that we found in Christian community. And so we hope that folks will just come out and see for themselves. Come visit us. We're open 6 days a week, all year round. Come talk to us, ask questions, talk to our children, and see for yourselves